Hello and welcome. I'm Amelia Hansen, Project Manager at Plastic Pollution Coalition. Thank you for joining us for our August webinar, The Music Industry's Plastic-Free Evolution. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a nonprofit communications and advocacy organization that collaborates with an expansive global alliance of organizations, businesses, and individuals to create a more just, equitable, and regenerative world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impacts. So we're going to have 3 poll questions today. Each question will appear for just about 20 seconds, so please answer quickly. Poll number 1. What alternatives to single-use plastic water bottles have you seen at concerts and music festivals? Please select all that apply. So it looks like a lot of you are definitely seeing drinking fountains, but also some fill your own water bottle stations. So we're really happy to see that. And not too many of you are seeing no options. So that's great to hear. All right, poll question 2. Now this one does have a correct answer. So it's just a little quiz here. How many single-use cups does the average stadium that hosts 300 events a year use annually? Please select one choice. All right. So we have a few people who got it right. I'm glad nobody guessed 80,000. Unfortunately, it's not that low. The correct answer is 5.4 million. All right. And our final poll question: how would you be willing to support a reuse refill program at concert venues? This is multiple choice. All right, it looks like folks would really like to be able to bring their own cup or bottle, but also would be willing to do any of these options. So that's really great to hear. Thank you all for participating in our poll questions. So today we are going to hear from Jasmine Gill, Grace Potter, and Max Tichler in conversation with Annie Farman and Don Richard. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderators, Annie Farman and Don Richard. Annie Farman has supported the nexus between entertainment and sustainability for over 20 years. Annie has launched sustainability initiatives at large-scale festivals like Bonnaroo Music and Arts Festival and Outside Lands Music Festival, aimed to educate both artists and fans. She helped fund initiatives like Code Red Climate, which brought the artist community together to support legislation which helped pass the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest piece of climate legislation in history. Don Richard is a musician, multimedia artist, animator, dancer, director, entrepreneur, and New Orleans dynamo. In addition to her prolific musical output, Dawn is active in a number of other artistic fields. She works in creative direction and creative partnership with Adult Swim. She runs the Papa Ted's vegan food truck in New Orleans, and she is passionate about emerging technology as well as the intersection of tech and art. Welcome, Annie and Dawn.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Hi there, I'm Annie Farman, and I'm on the board of Plastic Pollution Coalition. Thank you, everyone, for coming. You know, we have done so much great work inside the entertainment industry for years to influence change and to help people understand these issues and better practices. And it's working. There's a real internal shift within the music industry right now that is truly unprecedented. The plastic pollution crisis and our climate crisis is the same thing. 99% of plastic is made from fossil fuels, and the same companies that own polluting oil refineries also own plastic manufacturing facilities that are poisoning the communities around them. So it's very, very intertwined. I also want to point out the oil and gas industry has spent a lot of time and money to persuade us that this is our problem. You know, British Petroleum created the term your carbon footprint. But we are changing that. Through the power of our activism, music, and storytelling, we're coming together today to discuss what's happening within the industry and better practices for all of us.
Thanks, Annie. I can add to that and speak specifically because my lens is from the artist lens. I not only am an artist, but I work for an amazing organization called Hip Hop Caucus, and we work tirelessly to use our power in music and culture to drive social change and advocate for environmental justice. Our focus has been particularly in the fight between economic, civic, civil, and environmental justice. And in that, we have worked with artists to facilitate activism, storytelling, and drive forth the importance of how we can make a difference no matter how small or large our footprint can be present. In the industry, specifically, not just the industry, but where I come from, it matters most in this entertainment industry because most times artists are told that they don't have a space or a voice to utilize their passions when really their platforms are monumental and crucial. Through our work with the Hip Hop Caucus, we aim to raise awareness, mobilize communities, and push for policies that protect our environment and promote sustainability. It is our mission that combines our passion and social justice and commitment to addressing critical environmental issues. We're not just fighting for a cleaner air and water, we're fighting for the health and future of our communities. So with that, I'd love to introduce a friend of mine and also my coworker who is on the ground doing everything she can with her work with the caucus, but also just personally. She is beautiful at messaging, but also understands the importance of our voice and why this conversation is at the forefront of change, why these webinars and these conversations need to happen. Her name is Jasmine Gill. I'm happy to say that name because she has been beautiful at the work she's done with the Hip Hop Caucus. She's a dedicated advocate for climate and environmental justice with a deep-rooted commitment to empowering communities impacted by injustice. As a state director at Climate Power, she spearheaded initiatives amplifying BIPOC voices and driving narratives on climate and clean energy. Jasmine's expertise in storytelling, communications, and partnership building has been instrumental in advocating and advancing climate justice causes at both the state and national level. Jasmine, thank you for all you do. I adore you, and thank you for what you've been doing for the caucus. It is a pleasure to meet you and have you on this webinar.
Thank you so much, Dawn. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this very necessary conversation. I look forward to all the questions that you may have for me near the end. But again, my name is Jasmine Gill. I am the Associate Senior Director at Hip Hop Caucus for the Think 100% program, which is essentially our environmental justice leg of the work. And Dawn and I are co-leads, co-partners, and often thought partners in this work together in the work that she does. And so with that being said, I'm here to start off our conversation today around what does it mean to have artistry meet advocacy in this space? And then also, what does that mean for the Hip Hop Caucus? I'm going to go through kind of essentially 3 layers, which is the organization at WAD, how we see this work, how we do this specifically through the program that Dawn runs with our artist relations, and then also how we integrate that into the background work that we do with environmental justice at large through the Think 100% program. Thank you. So Hip Hop Caucus, this is our beautiful team. Meet them, know them. I hope y'all get to see them one day in action one day. But our team at the Hip Hop Caucus, a lot of questions that I get is why hip hop? Hip hop is the most popular genre music presence to ever exist, even more popular than the Beatles. And I don't say that for shock value. I say that because it's true through many, many studies that the music industry has done around the popularity of music and what drives people. And what we know at the Hip Hop Caucus is hip hop is more than just a genre, it's more than the music. It's what we wear, it's the movement, it's the culture of the people. And so for us, politics and policy is always temporary, but art is forever. And so we try to build this movement within the art so it forever sticks with people. The Hip Hop Caucus, as Dawn already shared, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan group. We do C3 and C4 work. And we are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. So for 2 decades, we have done the work that Dawn has spoke of, which is bringing young folks, people of color into the civic and policy process. And through this work, I think the first entry level here is how do artists even enter the Hip Hop Caucus? at such a high level, they can come in at two different ways we've noticed over these the past 2 decades of doing this work. The first is they're already issue activated. They already know exactly what issues they want to dive into, what personally impacts them, and they're just ready to be amplified. Sometimes that phase really goes through us understanding the knowledge that they already have at what level, and then putting them into activation, moving them into the work immediately that they see fit that matches what their vision is. And then the second part of that is always enhancing their knowledge, right? We can always learn. I mean, even myself at the Hip Hop Caucus, every single day that I'm learning. And so artists also share that passion to learn and want to know more about how they can be more knowledgeable on the issue areas that they care about. The second way that artists enter our space, which I think is probably a little bit more towards the conversation that we're having today, which is they have a sense of they want to be activated in some sort of way, which no matter which way they come to the Hip Hop Caucus, what centers artists in this place is the sense of justice. They want to be a part of that justice. They want to fight for the communities they care about. And so the second route that artists come to us, they may not necessarily know what issues they want to activate in, but they have that sense of, I want to be a part of justice. And so our job at the Hip Hop Caucus with this category of artists is to gauge exactly what they're interested in and then connect them to the intersectionality of the work, which is the hardest part. Because of all the issue areas that the Hip Hop Caucus activates around, which I'll get into next, climate justice, what we've learned, is often felt to be the most complicated issue for them to get activated into. They're the most timid to join the movement because they feel that it's more complex. And so once we have that conversation around intersectionality, we then kind of start them off small and build them up into the ways that we activate them. So the intersectionality that I'm speaking of, even though the focus today is around the climate plastics piece, I do want to highlight that the way that we draw people more into the space when it comes to plastics and climate action and pollution is around these other issue areas. Our other issue areas are around voting and democracy, as well as civil rights and economic justice. Some direct examples of how we do that. For civil rights, I'm sure you all have heard of issues like Cop City, for example. Those issues that typically hit different parts of our nation often directly correlate with environmental justice because of the ways we get to those issue areas. So for Cop City, if you're unaware, it's a certain level of deforestation that has to happen in order for those facilities to be built, and that is a direct correlation to environmental justice. And economic justice, which we'll get to a little bit later, these facilities that produce plastics, they have to be funded by someone, right? So connecting the dots to people, what is the economic finance route to how these things even happen that lead to the climate piece? And to the democracy front, there are active live legislation happening right now across our nation where there are rights being rolled back to how our communities are able to respond to climate and environmental justice issues that would limit our ability to fight this fight. So with that being said, the Think 100% program at the Hip Hop Caucus, as I mentioned before, is a campaign advocacy and policy platform that really drives that climate and environmental justice piece. And one of the larger pieces here that I really want to highlight for folks here today is that this plastic fights, there's a granular level to it, right? Which is, of course, getting bans that we can get with plastics, whether that's at the local, regional, or national level. But there at the bird's eye view is the industry that drives it. And what we know is that the petrochemical industry in particular are drivers in making that happen. The petrochemicals are building blocks for plastics because they derive from fossil fuels. And by 2050, petrochemicals will account for nearly half of the growth that we see in oil demand and thus growing the plastic industry. And so it's our role at the Hip Hop Caucus to make sure we connect the dots for our communities so that they understand that the industry not only just disproportionately impacts frontline communities, but it's also a main driver in making this pollution possible. And so once we connect those lines for artists, the next piece is always connecting them back to the impacts that this has on our communities, which is affecting our clean air, clean water, our health, and most importantly, intentionally impacting BIPOC communities that are overburdened the most. So what does this actually look like on a daily basis with artists? We fold them into many, many, many different ways. And this is just the short list that I wrote down for you all. But the first is that we have them speak to the issues in the media. Dawn is a great example of that. Dawn has a personal story connecting her family to petrochemical facilities. And so speaking directly to her personal impact that her family has faced in the media is a huge, huge, huge driver to being able to activate artists. We also activate them in their natural element, right, which is on the stage. When they're on the stage speaking to crowds, making sure we give them messaging that relates to whatever area they're in, whatever it is that, matches their performance at the time. Being able to drive that messaging is also equally important. We also have artist-specific products. Dawn can speak to this later on, but a great example is our Artivist shoot, right, which is where we connect artists to talk about these issues and then create some sort of specific artist product that we put out into the world to have people see the viewpoints of these artists past their music. And then speaking engagements, our Essence Festival, actually last month, is a great example of that, right? We had Big Frida come out to be a part of our panel, to speak on their personal experience living in New Orleans, how the petrochemical industry impacts their community and driving that message on a panel. Social media, this is the most typical way. I'm sure we're all very familiar with activating artists in social spaces to enhance our digital reach. And then lastly, community activation and experiences. We have our artists in the community, on the ground, speaking to the community, not only being a part of moments just to get to know the work, but also enhancing any sort of event that we have that further drives the knowledge around plastics, petrochemicals, and the fossil fuel industry in itself. So with that, I'll hand it off, but I think the biggest takeaway here for the Hip Hop Caucus is that we want you to understand that with artists, there are so many different levels in which we can bring them into this work. It starts with teaching them the basics and then kind of building up from there and meeting artists where they come to you. So with that, I'll hand it off.
I just wanted to add to what Jasmine said. As Artist Relations Director at Hip Hop Caucus, one of the biggest things that she stated, and I think would be helpful as we move forward with messaging with artists, is creating that safe space, right? Think about it in the sense of artistry. Artists, most times, independent or not, are stripped of their creative and say most times, right? Labels, machines, or even at an independent level, are told how to move in their touring, told how to move in their merch, told how to move on their albums, when they're delivered, their DSPs. And so when you really think about that, what the caucus is trying to do is create safe spaces for artists to come in, to educate, to facilitate, and also inspire them to be able to use their platform for good. They want to be able to have a voice, specifically because it's oftentimes stripped. We give them the direction to be able to tell them, not only is your voice powerful, but you have the assets to be able to create something worth speaking about, shifting, changing, and also being a part of that change. That's what's important, is creating a safe hub for a community of artists who have major platforms to be able to give this message a larger stage. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I had one other question on that. How do you see like the role of, just if you're not an artist, like how do you see the role of just a regular person who wants to get involved with Hip Hop Caucus, and what do you suggest there?
I'm sure our digital and production person would support me in saying, go to our website and make sure you sign up there. That's the quickest way. We move you through the ladder of advocacy, so to speak, immediately. There is more than enough work to share and to get you activated into this space. But generally, I think if not even there, right, show up. I think that's what the Hip Hop Caucus does best, right? We not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. Like, we're on the ground with the community day in and day out when we're supposed to be and when we need to be. And so if there's an event where you see the Hip Hop Caucus present, show up, right? Connect with our staff. We'll get you activated and get you into these spaces. But also, everyone, even past artists, even if you don't have this huge platform, every single person has a voice, has a story that's directly correlated with the with the work that we do at the Hip Hop Caucus. And so with that being said, more powerful than anything, I think through research that I've personally been a part of, but also and a lot of the things that we read here, we're learning that storytelling is more powerful than anything. And so music is storytelling in itself, which is why it does wonders to have artists be a part of this work. But all that to say, even if you're not an artist, you have a story to tell. And so another way to get involved with the Hip Hop Caucus's work is telling us what that story is, so then we can get you activated in the appropriate spaces for the masses, because that's what connects folks to this movement more than anything. Is the science is great, the statistics are great, the research is great, but that's not what connects with people. It's the stories.
The website is in the chat. Thank you, Jen, for providing it. So if you do and you are someone that wants to get into it, hiphopcaucus.org, just go to that website and we will happily find you and curate something specifically from the stories you tell.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Speaking of amazing artists, we have here Grace Potter. Thank you so much for joining us, Grace. You are a 3-time Grammy-nominated songwriter, vocalist, and instrumentalist who was born and raised in Fayston, Vermont. Grace, you are currently focusing on your solo career with success from your critically acclaimed solo albums, Midnight and Daylight. You're a rock and roll performer. You are currently touring across the country. And thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So I know you've been really busy putting on a festival just a week or two ago and touring.
Yes. And I had Plastic Pollution Coalition was there on site at the tent. We call it it was the first year of my new foundation, and I really felt that of all of the nonprofits I've ever worked with, it felt appropriate to have them there. Deanna and Jackie brought such good energy and so much knowledge, so much wisdom, and a lot of engagement that taught me so much about how exactly outreach truly works on the ground, boots on the ground style. You know, it was really amazing.
How did you, I mean, just curious, like, how did you start becoming kind of passionate about all of this? Was there a specific moment or just kind of built over time?
It's a combination of things, I think, that also stem back to the fact that I'm from Vermont, which is a very nature-minded community. And it's a small community. So what we have here is a microcosm that allows us to do some experimental political and socio-cultural navigating where we can see the ripple effect and the impact of it really immediately. And I think that immediacy is even, I think, doubled down when it's at a live concert, because there's all this activation. I've worked with Rock the Vote. I've worked with the Alzheimer's Association, the Epilepsy Foundation, and many other nonprofits. Farm Aid. I've done a lot of experiences there with those fine, family farm friendly gentlemen. And I found that with music, it gives people a reason to form a feeling without finding themselves on one side or the other of something. And suddenly you're having a real conversation about facts. And as I think was so noted beautifully earlier, the science is there. We have all that right there for us. It's not like there's some sage woo-woo booklet that everyone's passing around. Like, this is just facts. And there you can see in that photo, thank you for that, Nate Payne, who took that photo. And Deanna, I'm sure that you put this together. That's our steel cups. We've been not having single-use plastics on stage for as long as I can remember. It's never been a question of if we're ever going to eliminate bottles from stage. It's just I've never allowed them from the beginning, because it's, like I said, I think Vermont has a bit of that mindset from the beginning. Like, even back in the 80s, I remember learning about reduce, reuse, recycle, and going on a field trip to the recycling center to see how it all happens. So it's always been very near and dear to my heart, very almost almost just in my blood, you know,
It's
like
amazing.
microplastics.
So when you're touring, how is that when you're, you know, when your agent is talking to different venues, like when you're going, do you have that specifically laid out on your rider? Have you received any pushback or
Yes.
tell us about that a little bit?
Yes. The pushback, the biggest pushback is when we are providing cups, or when we're asking a venue to switch out and swap out the cups that they would prefer to use. It seems like there's a lot of marketing and there's some complicated vendor issues that come up where they can always blame the vendor. They can always say, oh, but it has to be served in this plastic cup that came from that vendor so people know what beer they're drinking or whatever. And so there's also been a lot of rooting down for me into the microbrew community, because so many cool venues have cool breweries, and so many breweries are making the effort to make this transition as well. So it's not a difficult conversation to have. And it's also, now, I mean, I throw my own festival. So when it's my festival, I can easily just say, we're not going to work with breweries that have single-use plastic cups as part of their vendor agreement. But I think that pushback was, I think it kind of went away. I think there's certain artists who, when we really aligned, and I think it was around 2008, 2009, that there was a clear line of contention among enough artists that vendors, but really promoters and venue owners had to get behind it, because the ethos was so undeniably right. And it's also just a sexier look. I think plastic bottles just look lazy. Every which way I see them, I'm like, come on, really, bro? What are you doing?
Yeah, seriously. How was it were you at Farm Aid this year?
I was not at Farm Aid this year. I was busy putting together our festival. And we were wedged between Newport Folk Festival and Newport Blues and Jazz Festival. That's just right down in Rhode Island. So we were able to get a lot of the artists up there. We had Head in the Heart, we had Flaming Lips. I was there, Anderson East, as well as Michael Marcagi, who's like blowing up all over TikTok. And, you know, he's got the social media thing, but I think also has that pragmatic, lovable songwriter energy that I think also envelops a lot of these messages. So what's really important to me is that I pass this on to other artists, younger artists who maybe haven't had as much exposure, haven't had the chance to get out into these venues and see all the plastic cups. You know, that scene in Almost Famous with Kate Hudson's twirling around with all those cups on the floor. It might be romantic in that shot because there was an art director who laid those cups there to make it look like confetti or like a flower garden full of red Solo cups. It's my nightmare. But also, you can't deny that scene. And I think so many of us got used to that in the early days of playing dive bars and venues where you're throwing beer bottles for fun. I think there's something that in the rock and roll culture, you know, I loved and so appreciated hearing about the hip hop side of things, because clearly that work is being done. It's not a new medium by any means, but rock and roll's like the really old, unmovable bastards. You know, I'm one of them. So it's important, I think, in some ways, but it's important that if there is any message that can move things forward, whatever genre you play, that it be one of new visual stimulation. And that's why I incorporate art and specifically plastic themed artwork into all of the pieces that we present at the festival as a part of the Arts Foundation and the initiative that I have there. I'm not sure, Deanna, I'm not sure if there's an image of any of the incredible art that we put up on site. But I'm really, really proud of the artists that contributed. We went dumpster diving for a couple of weeks leading up to the festival, and one sculptor built 3 pieces that were essentially raindrops that you could walk into, all made of single-use plastic bottles that were retrieved from the floods that just happened in Vermont. This is the second consecutive year that we've had climate change-based unprecedented flooding in Vermont. So I actually donated 100% of proceeds from my ticket sales to flood relief. But in keeping with, I think, the formation of an artistic idea and how to best envelop and capture the minds of both young people and also people who just need to get slapped in the face and woken up from their dream, walking into a raindrop made of bottles is quite a compelling way to understand how much you don't want to live in that raindrop and how much we all do, and we shouldn't.
Right. That is absolutely amazing. Yeah, music is just, it's such an incredible platform for people to expand their minds on, obviously. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think I talked to a brain surgeon about this. There's times when the neuroplasticity in your mind, it gets looser.
Yeah.
And it's during times of trauma,
Yep.
during a time of trauma, or it's a time like when you are listening to good vibrations, like, when you are
Yeah.
at a festival or listening to loud music, and people can really, they really are, you can expand your mind. People do expand their minds even without any help,
Well, I think there's some continuity there. There's a drug-like state that you get into because all of our neural networks are actually syncing up. Our heartbeats and our biorhythms are syncing to the music. And suddenly you look around and everything seems like it's all connected. It's all this coincidental, almost serendipitous, like everyone's on the same exact wavelength, and they are, and we're moving in a very similar way. And I don't like, again, I think something that I'm not trying to say we're hypnotists, but there's a power there that I think, obviously, given this webinar is a great example of that, but that there is a very compelling reason why we are not politicians and why we are not the church, and why there are so many ways that we can be polarized, but that there is something about the continuity of music and this contagion of love and inspiration, even if it is trauma based, because many people do come to concerts just to cry it out. Maybe they're grieving, maybe they just lost their house in the flood. We suffered a huge amount of damage on my farm that we just bought, and it was quite an empowering time for me to reconnect with my community. And not only that, but we set up this thing called the wing mill. So instead of the windmill, we made all the wings around it, where Vermonters and all concert goers could write their comments and just feed them into the wing mill, which then would spin based on the energy of people's ideas. And we got every brilliant idea that you could imagine, and so many, like hundreds of messages about plastic, because these sculptures were right there. So it was just this instant tie-in. It was an instant connection for people.
Wow, that is really, really cool. Tell us the name of your festival again.
It's called Grand Point North.
Grand Point
Yes,
North.
Grand Point North. This was the 10th annual, and my foundation is Grand Point Foundation. This was the first year we launched. Like I said, we shared the foundation tent, which was this big, beautiful balloon of a tent full of inspiring pieces, as well as a bunch of my wardrobe that I sold, all for benefit, that had been swept up in the flood, that we recovered and cleaned and then put on display and made available for sale. And every single penny we raised is going directly back to either the Vermont Community Fund or the Vermont Flood Relief. But we're being very specific about how we're allocating that money. And I've been on the phone quite a bit this week trying to figure out the best ways to invest, because I think the conversation that I'm hearing here and all of you presenters, and by the way, thank you. I'm such a huge fan of so many of you. And I love this coalition. I love the group of people that are here. And if there's one thing I can do, it's to make people feel like they're stumbling onto a cool new band called Give a Shit, and teach them how,
That's incredible. Well, you are really walking the walk, and I can't thank you enough. Okay, we'd like to introduce our final panelist here, Max Tischler. Max works as a tour and road manager with a number of international acts, including musician Jack Johnson. His role as Jack Johnson's sustainability coordinator includes advancing greening at venues and at the All at Once platform, which supports a broad network of nonprofit groups. Welcome, Max, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Annie. Appreciate it, and I really feel very, very blessed to share the panel with Jasmine and Grace, and appreciate the opportunity to be here as a representative of our team at Jack Johnson Music. And I think that will probably become fairly evident as I discussed this morning, that this has been a journey, and it's been a journey with contributions from lots of different people. And so I really appreciate the couple of touch points raised by Grace and Jasmine as well, is that it's like it really is an effort with lots of people contributing to it. You may have heard I have a fairly eclectic background, but today representing the Jack Johnson team. And for those of you who are not familiar with Jack, Jack is a performing artist and touring artist that came to, I guess, popularity and prominence in the early 2000s. Jack's background, he grew up in Hawaii, and I think what that has developed in him on a personal level is that, you know, a real resonance and respect for the environment and for nature. And I think for Jack and his wife, Kim Johnson, who's also his manager, I think very early on with the success of him as a touring artist, they had the realization that it's like, well, along with, you know, traveling the world and putting on shows, is, you know, you have a significant environmental impact that goes along with moving, you know, people around, equipment around. And I think that was, you know, a realization that both of those that Kim and Jack had very early on, that they wanted to reduce that impact. And so the decisions that they made, you know, back then, that's the early 2000s, and still evident today, is that sustainability, environmentalism is really at the forefront of the decisions they make when we're going out and putting on shows and putting on tours. And so when that personal philosophy and intent is really sitting at the top of that, you know, that top of the team, it trickles down. And so for us, everything that we do has that has that intention and desire to, you know, to reduce our footprint, have impact, and be meaningful. And so I'll talk a little bit today just about some of the engagement that we've had over the years, some of the actions and strategies and programs that we do on tour, as an insight into, you know, the journey that's been. So could I go to the next slide, please? And so that's really that, you know, when it comes from Jack and Kim and the band and management, then it really, that's you know, the groundwork is set and the intention is set right from the start. And so one of the biggest intentions for us as a touring group is to then engage with the venues, the promoters, and then we have the other stakeholders that are part of the touring group. The venues and promoters are especially something that we've really been pushing the envelope, and I know Grace touched on that. And it's interesting that Grace brought up the date 2008, because it's around about the same time that Jack, along with the help of, for example, Adam and Lauren and Tanner at Reverb, Michael Martin at Our World, where we developed an environmental rider. And so for those of you who without a background in the music industry, is that bands have a production rider that is sent out to venues and promoters to outline the requirements that they need to put on a show. And that's, you know, that's all, you know, sound and production and lights and so forth. But the environmental rider then outlines all the things that they'd like to see at a show that is aligned with sustainability in environment. And it's one of those things. Back in 2008, you know, a lot of those requests was like, what's this? It's like, you know, it's been sent out, and our booking agent, Tom Chauncey from Partisan Arts, who's also Grace's booking agent, is, you know, he would send that rider out along with the production rider and the contracts for the venue, and it would often be come back with like, well, what's this? What's going on? And I'm happy to say, and I think that will come up in this conversation as we go along, is that a lot of those requests that sit within the environmental rider were, once taken as like, oh, that's a little bit weird, to now it's kind of like, actually, that's standard practice. That's MO for some venues and promoters. And that's one of those things that we've seen, the incremental shifts in the industry since back in the day has really been encouraging. And so a huge shout out to, the venues and the promoters that we've worked with for so many years to have taken some of those requests, which were unusual in the past, to now, adopt them and move forward. And it's one of those things that, it's for myself as an environmental science who sort of was once moonlighting in the music industry, I can see that it's like environmentalism and conservation within the music industry is, the industry itself is an incredibly potent vector and power vector for social and environmental change. And I think that will also come up later in the discussion as we delve into some further stuff with Jasmine and Grace. And so just outlining a couple of the other stakeholders that are really important to us. Jack and Kim set up the Kukua Hawaii Foundation back in 2004. We also set up the Johnson Awana Foundation, which supports the All at Once platform. And the All at Once platform is an engage program that invites non-profit groups to be a part of each and every one of our shows. And so at our shows, we have what we call the Village Green, where we invite non-profit groups that are active in the cities and areas that we're playing at, as a chance to sort of shine the spotlight from the stage to the groups that are active in the communities that we're traveling through. That might be the Surf Router Foundation in San Diego, or Harlem Grown, Guerrilla Gardeners in New York. It's a really diverse group of nonprofits that all have the intention of either looking at reduction in single-use plastics or the promotion of sustainable food programs and systems. And so it's one of those really beautiful components of our show where the fans come, they arrive, and they can sort of, much the same as Grace was saying at her festival, it's like, interface with some amazing programs that have some really amazing social environmental programs that fans can be engaged with. So whilst fans may come to the show to, well, one, be entertained, but also, and as you said before, it's like also to gather and be part of a group that's bigger than just yourself. It's also the chance for them to come and actually like interface with these groups that are active, and that may, it may have someone signing up to a newsletter, or it may have them turning up to a beach cleanup, or it may have them volunteering at their community gardens and that sort of thing. So for us, and we've seen that over the years, that it's a lot of those groups have really had huge amplifications from the engagements they've had with fans at our shows. And so, fans at our shows not only engaging with our non-profit groups, but also we introduce a whole range of different programs into our shows. And if we could go to the next slide. That I've touched on the local profits, but there are also a number of programs that we have, like the Capture Commitment, which is people standing there engaging, and that's really something, especially since the emergence of social media, where people stand and make a commitment to do something or be a part of, and then upload it into the social media network. Plastic-free initiatives is something that I'll delve into our next slide. I've mentioned the sustainable local food systems, and that's both for us as a touring group, so backstage, encouraging farm to table, catering groups to engage with local producers and so forth. We promote recycling and waste reduction, and a lot of these sit within the environmental rider. And the environmental rider, as I've mentioned before, is probably something that we can delve into a little bit further in the discussion. Other things like having eco-friendly merchandise, and that's not just having, say, organic cotton going to the production of clothing items, but also having reusable tote bags and water bottles and reusable cutlery sets and that sort of thing. Again, it's one of those things where it's like just doing things a little bit differently to engage fans. We also encourage alternative transport, specific parking for carpooling fans. We also set up the bike valets in some areas for guests, and then of course energy conservation and carbon offsets. So the energy conservation is we really encourage as something as simple as changing light bulbs in dressing rooms to LED, to promotion of solar powered venues, and then a contribution by the promoter themselves to offset the energy use and consumption during the show itself. And that sits within a much bigger realm of us as a touring group, where we then offset all our carbon footprint over the course of an entire tour or leg or show. So that's a couple of outlines in terms of what we do as a touring group. We'll go to the next slide. There's so the shows. Next slide, please. And so there, you can see that there's just some examples of a couple of simple things that we. Oh, we could just go back, Joe. Some of the things that we implement at the shows, and this is again with engaging fans, but also engaging with venues and promoters to do things, say, a little bit differently across bars or concession stands. And so, for example, the straws, well, that was back in the day. Straws were still really prominent. Now they seem to be phased out, which is great, and I think that's been a movement by the industry writ large. Front of house water stations, and I know we've touched on that. I know there was poll questions about alternative to single-use plastic. For us, we carry filtered water stations with us as a touring group. We set them out in the front of house and encourage people to bring reusable water bottles. That was another program that we started with Green Music Australia back in 2018, and now it's a campaign that we're promoting across right around the world with venues and festivals to become a BYO bottle venue, where people are allowed and encouraged to bring water bottles, knowing that they'll have the facilities to fill them up with filtered water at the venues. So instead of going as part of our rider that it's like, well, we'd like not to sell plastic water bottles across bars, to like, well, we understand there might be some licensing issues, but if we allow people to bring in water bottles, we'll provide the water station so that they can actually fill them up. And you can see from some of the figures there, the huge amounts of water that we've been able to measure as metrics to then show that we've diverted huge amounts of plastic bottles from going to recycling or landfill. And then the reusable cup program is something that I think is again, back in the day, and Grace touched on it, was always kind of a really difficult conversation, and it's still a difficult conversation to have to this day, but there's a real movement there to go away from single-use either plastics or compostables across bars to having reusable cups. And there's been some Michael Martin again with Our World. We've had Turn. There's a few companies now that are really pushing that. Live Nation have adopted onto a lot of their venues reusable cup programs. And for us, I think that's using good durable materials to promote that as a program at venues is one way that we can have an enormous impact across the industry. And I'll just go to the next slide. And so, as mentioned, the engagement with fans, and this is really kind of like drawing everyone into the programs that we attempt to implement. And so this is a story wall. The shows that we play are often large enough to have IMAGs or video walls that are associated with the stage. And so we have a rolling story wall that promotes all the actions that people can take at the events. So again, it's one of those things where it's like clear to the venue and the promoter that, hey, we're really serious about this. We want to trumpet the programs. We want to promote these different things. And then to have fans sitting there with these sorts of messaging on the stage is a really powerful way to promote that. So whether it be, go and use, the free fill-up stations, here's some items at the merchandise. For example, Live Nation at our North American tour in 2022 were really open to using our reusable cup program by doing a signature cocktail at bars. So you could go to the bar, buy a signature cocktail, and get the cup as a free item that could be taken home. And then of course the Village Green again was another is always a big one that we promote. And so just to the next slide. And this is a really wonderful photo from 2017. This was taken at the Santa Barbara Bowl, and a big shout out to Eric Shiflett and the team at the Santa Barbara Bowl. They've been really accommodating of our requests really from day one, and we've played this venue many times. This is a photo from 2007. This is when we gave out a reusable cup to every patron that was at the show, and I think we did that over 2 or 3 nights. This is Jack holding up his cup with the crowd holding up theirs in the background, and that's something that the Santa Barbara Bowl now uses, where you can actually bring your reusable cup to the venue across their entire summer series. And it's one of those things that I think, just to focus on say the reusable cup program or the BYO bottle program, when we send out the environmental rider, it's always with the intention of like, well, can we just meet best practice in wherever we are? It may be a really easy, simple turnkey solution if we were, say, in Berkeley, in San Francisco, where a lot of those things are sort of implemented, in the community writ large. It might be a harder conversation to have with someone who's, doing a show somewhere in South America or somewhere else, say in Southeast Asia. But it's one of those things we always try and meet best practice. We always try to ensure that it's really engaging and it makes sense to the community, the promoter, and the venue, and the fans that we're playing to. But it's the intention is always to make it a legacy thing. So it's kind of like, well, we'd like to do a reusable cup program for Jack's show, but it doesn't have much effect if the next week the venue just has to go back to get reuse, using single-use plastics. And so for us, it's always, wanting to put this request in as a legacy. It's like, well, this is what's happened. This is some of the things that we've learned over the years. These are the difficulties that we might be changing, but we'd like to demonstrate how easy it can be and where the industry might be going. And so just to conclude there, it's one of those things. I hope just to give you an insight in some of the things that we do as a touring team, whilst very foreign back in the day, and I'm talking early 2000s, it's been really encouraging that it's the further we go and the more that society and the industry catches up, that some of these programs are becoming the MO for people. And again, it's one of those things that it's not just us that are doing it. We're drawing in fans, we're drawing in venues and promoters, and it's really a contribution by many people to have success. And I think that's going to become evident as we discuss a little bit further, that it's going to it really takes a community to drive change. And the byline for all at once is individual actions multiplied by a million creates change. And I think that's, whether that's human rights or whether that's environmentalism or social change, I think that's something that's probably going to really resonate. And hopefully from this webinar, we can, be able to demonstrate that small things multiplied by many is the way that we have been able to and will continue to affect change. So yeah, appreciate the chance to share some of that story and journey of Jack and Kim and us as a touring team.
Thank you so much, Max. You guys are change makers in this whole world, and I really appreciate hearing more about that. I'd love to bring Jasmine back, and Grace had to drop off, unfortunately, but I do have a question just sort of about that, and for you, Dawn, as well. I mean, if you're not Jack Johnson, who has an enormous following, like where do you see the role of smaller artists who are touring in vans, and what opportunities do you see for them kind of, to get involved in this way on their tours?
I mean, I know I can speak for myself when I say that's like the big question, right? For indie artists who don't have big budgets, who don't have access to partnerships and nonprofits, how do they start? One of the things I just want to say to both Grace, Jasmine, and Max is what I see here is intentionality. And I just want to say thank you to you all for putting forth intention. And I would also then slide that on to the artists or the people who genuinely want to apply this but don't know how because they don't have the resources. I think it's intentionality. Something as small as deciding the venue or speaking with the venue you connect with to do your performance. I know me specifically as an independent artist who works on the smaller side, I'm signed to Merge Records. My venues look more along the lines of 250 to 300 capacity. We don't have major systems to help support us. We're just as intentional as saying we want to speak to the venue that we work with to say, how do we implement a no plastics participation for the venue for our show? How can we, the sustainability, the merch that we sell, how do we make that sustainable where we can partner with an independent business where they can supply, or we can work with having merch sold that is sustainable, that can be reusable. And then something as powerful as at the end or at the beginning of your show, stating that you're utilizing these things and you're implementing them in your shows so that people can see the intentionality behind your work and they leave with a call to action or leave inspired, knowing that an artist just at a small level is doing that. Something that I think that you spoke about, Max, as well, is even like this reverb. That's genius to me. I think there is ways in which smaller or artists or nano, we speak in never calling artists small or large, but nano, micro, mega, and celebrity. And I believe on the nano level, the relationship you build with your venues matter. And so even if you are not, if you have a booking agency or you don't or can't afford a booking agency and you're booking your own shows, that relationship that you build with your venue could possibly be the conversation you may need to be able to have something as simple as saying, can I work with my production? Can I work with stage production? Can I work with the venue or the promoters to say, how can I apply this environmental rider? How can I implement this, and what on my rider can be environmentally friendly? Start small, but if the intention is there, it can grow to something much bigger. That's my personal opinion, speaking as someone who is in fact an independent artist and on a smaller scale.
And
Please.
I think another great example, Dawn, that I would love for you to highlight for people is around the work that we've seen with AY Young, and another example of how an artist who has taken the route of doing the self work, but also implementing it into his own personal tour, music, products that are used for production. I would love for you to enhance like what that can look like in real time with the artist, with AY as an example.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding me. AY has been a part of, I mean, you've probably seen him at COP, you've probably seen him all over, a young artist who is utilizing his platform to do a solo run performance. He's calling it Project 17, where he's collaborating with nonprofits and artists to have music centered around environmental justice, but also walking the walk by actually performing in spaces run by solar.
Batteries.
And
Battery tour, right?
Battery. Yeah, it's called the Battery Tour. And it is phenomenal. I mean, Annie, you obviously must have met him and see it. And it is a large feat that he is taking on, but doing it with such, man, it's just, he's energetic and infectious because he truly believes in this. And one of the conversations that he's spoken about that matters to him is like, I am a person of color. I am a Black man speaking on this. This affects all of us. This is a human conversation. But he is speaking on it on such a personal level. And he is implementing it in real time. And I am one of the artists that want to work with him because of his conversation through it. He is connected with the caucus and wants to be an ambassador and speak on behalf of our work and his work at the same time. So he is a prime example, and I'll put his website and his information in the chat, but he is a prime example of an artist that is doing it on the ground day by day. He is speaking on policy and sitting in the rooms of policy and legislation to talk about this, but also then taking it to a stage and performing it in real time. So he is an example of an artist that is doing the work, understanding the work, educating himself on the work, and then implementing the work. Thank you, Jasmine.
No problem. And I think even past, like AY is a great example of someone who has like just taken it to an extreme level of how this can be implemented into their art and as they, you know, are on stages. But also I want to recognize that people might not be at that level just yet. And so my recommendation on that end is to connect with the people who are able to enhance not only their knowledge, but how they can show up in the space. Of course, Hip Hop Caucus is one of those organizations that does that, but we have partners like the Music Vote Coalition that also brings in artists from all genres to be a part of that work, no matter what issue area that they're interested in. And so getting them connected to the appropriate folks that can help, one, encourage them to take more of an active space in this work, but also give them the tools they need in order to grow within that work. So that would be my recommendation.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. AY, I think he developed Project 17 based on the 17 UN sustainability goals, right?
Exactly.
17 songs, one per each. You know, he connected with an artist, a different artist per song. And I mean, the fact that he's able to tour on batteries only, it's really remarkable. And I hope he gets, I really want him to get out there as much as he possibly can. In general, I mean, for all of you, like, are you guys feeling a shift towards this, like towards, you know, more sustainable practices, you know, in just within the music industry right now, more than we have right now? Because I feel like I'm feeling it.
I can go first. I think on my end, I think, yeah, there is a shift and an increase in interest. I think artists are, they're just like everybody else, right? They're human beings. They experience the impacts that climate change and that issues like plastic pollution have on us every day. You know, anything from Drake's house getting flooded in Canada, right? That was recent, but all the way back to many years ago. Birdman from Cash Money Records, Hurricane Katrina, him losing up to 20 houses, 50 cars. This goes back many years, right? Climate change isn't new. We didn't cause it. It's like, as far as the community and the pollution that we experience, the brunt of the impact of it, but we can be a part of that solution. And I think so what we're seeing now is people recognizing and connecting the dots and having epiphanies to, oh, this is impacting everyone, not only, you know, just a subset of people, right? And we're learning that climate change doesn't care about your zip code. And so what we need to do is make sure that we connect the dots for people to what the things that they're seeing in extreme weather, the things they're seeing from plastic pollution are being connected to how can I be activated. And so there's still a significant amount of work to be done. I think artists are aware of the issues in itself, but they just don't know how to get started in the space. And that's often the first hurdle that we face at Hip Hop Caucus when we talk to artists about this work.
Yeah,
And then
I think,
speaking, Max, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that how we've experienced, I think we've seen changes, and I touched on that just earlier, as you know, we've seen some really definitely some significant shifts, the way that some, you know, promoters or venues might operate. And I think that's just how the music industry as a microcosm representative of the, you know, the macrocosm, which is, you know, society in general, is that we're starting to catch up on, you know, whether it's waste management or those sorts of things, that I think that we've definitely seen improvements there, but we're also seeing just all the similar things that are hamstringing, or, you know, progress in other parts. So I think where the music industry is, that it's like, the music industry is so deeply entrenched in sort of like that ability for people to raise their voice. You know, so whether you go back to, you know, decades ago, where people were singing writing and singing protest songs, I think now that the climate crisis is becoming and is getting so much prominence, I think, you know, the ability for people to be able to raise their voice and be heard in the music industry is probably where we could see where it's like the industry itself is going to be able to drive change. And I think just touching back on that sort of scalability, I think, again, as Dawn said, it's like, if the intention is there from the artist, it doesn't matter if they're playing a room for 100 people or they're playing, you know, a stadium for 100,000 people. If that intention is there from that artist, that voice will be heard. And it's like that can affect change at a very small level, whether it's just one person in that crowd of 100 or 10 people in that crowd of 100,000 people. I think that's where it's going to go. And I think that what we're experiencing in the industry itself is the same pressures and difficulties that we're experiencing in day-to-day society. So I think, as much as they've seen some improvements, and, you know, we definitely have, we've still got a long way to go.
I agree with that, Max. And I wanted to speak to, when we speak about shifts, to talk to Jasmine about the work that the Hip Hop Caucus did for Cancer Alley in locking in John Legend to be able to do a tour of Cancer Alley and speak to that. This is one of those prime examples of, you're seeing a shift because the caucus reached out to his team. His team was able to speak with us, and not only speak with us, but then to meet the incredible Miss Sharon Levine, who is with Rise St. James organization, who is a friend and ally to the caucus. But Jasmine, I'd love to speak with you about just, that's a major shift, and how that shift really went about, and how the caucus is doing that kind of work, where artists are now not only wanting to be engaged, but they want to be educated, and sending that messaging out and having him tour.
And Jasmine, I'm sorry, would you, just for anybody who's watching who doesn't know, will you describe what Cancer Alley is for all of us?
Yeah, of course. Cancer Alley, I believe, is about an 85-mile stretch of land that is heavily impacted by the petrochemical facility. There, I think, it is one of the largest areas that holds the most amount of petrochemical facilities than anywhere else in the nation. And it's called Cancer Alley because there's such, not only a high risk, but high deaths because of cancer from the pollution that those petrochemical facilities cause within that area. And so Miss Sharon Levine has, from Rise St. James, has been a huge, not only fighter and been heavily impacted health-wise as one of the residents in that area, but also is one of the many, many women in that space leading that charge in that fight. And so when we heard that John and his team had a huge interest, not only in the plastic fight, the first step that we did was connect him and his team to how the root cause of getting into plastic products is petrochemical facilities, because these are the facilities that actually make the products, right? And so essentially, if we can cut down to the root, we can cut down the arm of the problem, so to speak. And so the reason why we went about connecting John to Rise St. James versus the Hip Hop Caucus kind of being the first touch point into getting into that issue is because, as I mentioned earlier, the storytelling piece is so powerful, and there is nothing like the power of firsthand experience. Miss Sharon, her family, her community, they are breathing that air every single day. They are living the experience of what it means to have the health impacts that they receive from doctors when they go to their doctor's visits. They see their family, friends, loved ones passing away from cancer due to this pollution. They see the soil contamination, how it's impacting their air, their water. They haven't had clean air and clean water for many, many years. They can tell you stories about how when they were younger, the stark differences that they notice in their environment versus what they're living through right now. And so it's extremely important to the Hip Hop Caucus to place artists in those sort of opportunities to learn and see and hear those firsthand experiences as much as we can, because it is what will stick with them more than anything. It is what will further ignite that feeling of justice, of wanting to do something, of wanting to be an advocate in the space more than the Hip Hop Caucus ever could in sending them a fact sheet or sending them a report. These are things that actually connect more, not only to the larger masses, but also to the artists that we want to present these stories to the larger masses. And so with that being said, and it also further connects the dots to them, right? And so Dawn actually is another artist who has created that reality for the work that we do. Whenever Dawn talks about the petrochemical facilities that impact her family directly, even our own staff, she's had our own staff come out there, book where you stay in this actual area where my family lives, so you can breathe the air, so you can see what it's really like to be in this area, right? Because she understands that without being in the actual places where this pollution is happening, without seeing what frontline communities are witnessing, you'll never be able to fully comprehend the impact that it has. And so the more that we can do and give artists those type of experiences, at the Hip Hop Caucus, we feel that it's better to be able to connect them to the people that are experiencing the hardest and the most, more than anyone else in the nation.
And that Cancer
That
Alley
will cause,
sorry, Dawn, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was saying that causes the shifts to be grander, bigger, larger, and more effective.
Right. And Cancer Alley, it's basically the strip between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, it kind of goes down. You can see it. It follows almost the Mississippi River, the river bend.
One of my favorite places on earth is right there. This incredible juke joint. If anybody happens to live anywhere near Baton Rouge, it's in Zachary, Louisiana. It's just north of Baton Rouge. Teddy's Juke Joint is an amazing little music venue in the woods across the street from the petrochemical industry. But are you seeing any of the work that you guys are doing, like it reverberating within New Orleans musical culture? I'm just curious because that in and of itself, is its own special place in the industry, and kind of right in the heart of it right there.
Absolutely. And so much so that, again, Big Frida had been doing their own work within the space. But I think when we brought Frida in for Essence Festival and we had the opportunity to sit, Jasmine and I, in meetings and speak and tell Frida about the experiences firsthand, Frida was so invigorated and so ready to speak on what was truly going on, that I thought I saw a shift in Frida that I hadn't seen prior. Even though Frida had been on the ground doing performances and supporting, there was something else that was felt after the education that we had for our speakers, for them to really receive what we were giving. And I think we've seen that across the lines from many different artists locally, and on a larger level, like specifically Pell, Mariah Moore, PJ Morton, Tank and the Bangers. These are artists that we've all worked with, spoken to, they've wanted to learn and put back into the city. New Orleans is such a small space that you can see the love and appreciation. Again, I don't think New Orleans is a city, it's a lifestyle. And that is the reason why so many artists have come back. And even John Baptiste, a friend from many who have tried to work with John, I think John understands also what's going on within the city. And you see this kind of pulse happening where the artists are not only saying we see this as a problem, but we're coming and moving back home and implementing it into our systems, into our creative councils, into our conversations to see how we can better move the city in the right direction, because we have these situations happening. Our own founder is from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and that passion is in the amazing Reverend Lennox Yearwood. And so even him building this organization and having our organization be so heavily on the ground is because of his love for the city. And for the state. Jasmine, if you want to speak further to it, but I definitely see a major pulse within our own local performers. And the incredible Cess 4-5, who has been doing tons of work locally on the grassroots level as well.
Yeah, as I said earlier, like when I introduced Hip Hop Caucus, why hip hop, like it's deeper than the music. It's culture. It's a full movement. And so not only New Orleans specifically is so near and dear to the Hip Hop Caucus and the heart of our staff. Not only is our president from there, Dawn's from there, and many other of our staff members, but it's at the nexus of why the Hip Hop Caucus even started, which was post Katrina, which I know the topic of the panel is really kind of limited to us talking about plastics and the kind of the connection to plastics that our work has. But even at a fuller, larger scale, the Hurricane Katrina impact in New Orleans has forever been kind of one of the heavily staples as to why we do this work. And so what we know about our work is that to the environmental piece, which I saw a question earlier in the chat around jet travel and air pollution. All those things are extremely important to this work and are pieces to being a part of this movement. And so we're all at a certain scale identifying what is moving the work the most. And so for the Hip Hop Caucus, it is the pieces around the fossil fuel industry that we talked about earlier. It is around climate justice. It is around social justice and environmental justice. And so to your question about New Orleans in general, it has such a close place to our hearts because the people of New Orleans, the people of Louisiana have been some of the most impacted in all those issue areas.
What I would like to say though is, as a devil's advocate to my own city, we are a festival city. We are a touring city. We are a musical city. And I would love to implement and talk about the possibilities of how we could push forward with Max has implemented in a lot of the venues, is pushing our city to get more and more away from our plastics. Because what you've noticed, because so many festivals exist, is we and Mardi Gras, we have not figured out how to pull a lot of those negative at the negative our city just, you know what I'm trying to, I just feel like we haven't figured out how to get the negative fallout from what we've applied, because we are such a place that has so much music and festivals. I would love to find out and really work with the artists that we have tapped into and the venues that we know are there in the city to figure out how to start applying some of what you've done with Jack Johnson, because I think that would benefit our city. And it is also an added problem to the city that could potentially ruin us even more than the petrochemical plants, is if we continue to have that added to the other things that we have. It just hurts a city that is so beautiful and so visited frequently, that I think we need to find a solution there. And that's one of the things that I would love to provide and help with my local artists, to figure out how we can apply to our festivals, to our venues, and work with our creative councils and our government and local and state legislation to figure out how to do a better job of getting rid of a lot of the plastics that are a part of the problem in our city.
Does Jack Johnson ever play in New Orleans? Sorry, has he played there recently?
We haven't played there. We were down, I think we're down sort of, no, I don't think we've actually played in New Orleans itself, Annie. But Dawn, it's a really great point, and it's one of those things that and also with some of the music festivals that I've been involved with here in Australia, it's a similar sort of scenario where you can put all the infrastructure in place for like, oh, well, we've got a recycling waste stream, we've got a compostable waste stream, but if the city or the council or the state doesn't have the infrastructure to cope with those waste streams, then you kind of just that's it could appear as utter greenwashing, because patrons are at the show and they're like, oh well, I can put that into the bin, thinking that that's the end point is going to be where the sign is saying it's going. But sometimes that just doesn't happen if the city doesn't have the infrastructure to cope with it. So it's going to require, again, it's like, one, approaching a festival with realistic options, but also having to lobby your councils like, hey, we need to up the ante here if possible, to try and cope with large numbers of people and the waste that's created. Just coming back though, it's like, I think one of the real turnkey solutions moving forward is reusables. again, if you can try and get around, you know, the health board issues or the licensing issues, to start incorporating reusables into you know, bars and concessions, that's going a long way toward you know, taking out the waste problem of putting large groups of people in the one place. And when I say reusables, it's like, it's not a single use, well, let's use a compostable cup. This is actually something that can be like used multiple times. And some of those groups that I mentioned earlier, some of the third-party vendors that are providing that infrastructure, be it cups or serviceware, they're the ones that it's going to, you know, you can see they're providing that solution. It's like, well, we can provide this that can be used multiple times and just take away the waste stream altogether.
Right on. It's funny.
How do you,
Oh, go
oh,
ahead. Dawn.
sorry.
Oh, I was
How do
just,
you do the culture with COVID? And I
That-
like with, and that, because, you know, like that, even though it's your cup and even though you're using it, how do we tell people, like, you know, and make that attractive in a time where like COVID just beat us up and then is making a resurgence again?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's a great point. And I remember there was a lot of pushback, and has been a lot of pushback since COVID, because people say, well, we can't use reusable cups. And the models that these reusable programs are using is, it's not necessarily use exactly the same cup. You give your cup in, it gets washed, and you get given a new cup. So you put a deposit down for, you know, you pay $1 on top of your first beverage, and then you just keep swapping out cups, you know, for the duration of that festival period. But it's a great point. And often, you know, that gets thrown at you as a pushback. It's like, oh, we can't do it because of health restrictions. But there are definitely ways around it. And we've found that it's remarkable how much those laws can shift depending on who you ask and in which city and which state you're in. So again, it's just trying to gain that transparency, having the understanding of what's available, what's expected, and then and pushing the envelope, because it's sometimes we find that it's like, you just got to push that envelope a little bit further, and then all of a sudden you talk to the person and says, hey, using reusables or doing refills isn't an issue. So yeah, it's one of those things. We love pushing the envelope and just asking questions, because often you'll find that it's like you can find a right way around. And I think the technologies and the infrastructure that's starting to emerge now, I think we're going in a really good place. And I guess sorry, John, I kind of skewed there, thinking that, you know, the waste management is probably one of the key problems of having large numbers of people at a festival. That's certainly something that we've experienced, but there's lots of other, you know, issues with having, you know, large gatherings as well. But in my experience, the waste one is the big, you know, particularly when you look at some of the big music festivals, both in the States, Australia and Europe and UK.
yeah, it would be great to know what happens to all those cups at Jazz Fest, you know, in New Orleans, like where it's sponsored by Shell and it's quote unquote recycled, but it's probably being incinerated somewhere on Cancer Alley.
Still right next to my parents' home that they breathe, that now they get sinus infections. That's the truth.
Right.
Mhm.
But Dawn, I can speak to just really quick, and I know we have to wrap up soon, but you know, the science of COVID is that does not sit on surfaces. And so it's funny with the health you know, impacts of all of that. So in in Manchester, Tennessee, when we were implementing our reusable cup program at Bonnaroo, the health department said, sure, it's no problem. You can refill cups out there. And we had tens of thousands of steel reusable cups that people brought back their cup and got a discount through our Refill Revolution program we did there. But then at Outside Lands here in San Francisco, you know, we had to really kind of maneuver through a little bit more red tape in San Francisco Health Department, but we did it and we were able to get cups refilled. You know, it was kind of, we had this really interesting little shoe-in through the wine area called Winelands out in San Francisco. And we were able to approve getting a refillable cup program with beer and cocktails. And we're really, you know, we just had our festival last week, but we really encourage bringing back your cup from previous years and refilling your cup out there. Through a lot of that is through good messaging. That's really the most important piece of that. But, you know, I happen to think that the New Orleans Health Department probably will not care as much as you would imagine. So we should connect offline about that. more. But so I know we're getting to the end here. I just wanted to give our panel an opportunity to if there's any takeaways or if anybody wanted to say anything else right before we exit.
I'll add something in a shameless plug, which is, as I said earlier, you want to show up, you want to know how you can get involved. Our next event for the Hip Hop Caucus is actually the 19th commemoration of Hurricane Katrina. We will be on the ground at the levees and at Huntersville. If you are in the area on August 31st, which is a Saturday, from 12 to 5:30 local time, we will be there, not only remembering those lives that were lost with Hurricane Katrina, but having performances, having food, and celebrating the resilience of the community of New Orleans and what's next to come through these fights. Because Hurricane Katrina is not the first and won't be the last, but it was definitely one of the largest natural disasters that has impacted any community in the United States. And so it's important that we remember it, but also keep moving in this work to protect our communities, make them more resilient, focus on what we can drive and mobilize people around to decrease the climate change and the environmental justice work that we're doing at the Hip Hop Caucus. So if you are available, show up. We will be there and get activated.
Thank you, Jasmine. Max, did you want to finish up with anything?
Yeah, thank you. I just want a huge shout out and appreciation to Jasmine and to Grace. I know Grace, has probably ducked off to do sound check at a show, and also to Dawn and Annie and all the Plastic Pollution Coalition for having me on board and representing. Like I said, it's like I'm part of a much larger team with Jack and his family and it really is a touring family, but also like we're part of we're another cog in the larger music industry. And I think it's one of those things that it's like we're all kind of like moving in the same direction, and it's like it's really so optimistic and encouraging to see that it's like we're heading towards the right areas. We might have to sort of navigate and negotiate, but moving together in one single movement, making small contributions, large contributions, whatever we can. I think it's I've got such as a father of young kids, I'm kind of like I'm so excited to think that it's like the music industry can really trailblaze its way into terms of creating a sustainable future where the impacts are far more profound than just protecting the environment, but giving voice to everyone who needs it is something that I it's one of those things that I feel blessed to be part of this industry because of that. So I really appreciate the chance to be a part of this panel and to share it with you all and parts of our journey, and hopefully we all of our paths cross moving forward as we aim towards that end goal of a brighter future.
Thank you so much, Max. Dawn, did you want to say anything?
Just wanted to thank everyone for having us. This is important to us. We appreciate you, and the education that we have here to give and send forth from the Hip Hop Caucus we're grateful. So thank you so much for having both Jasmine and I. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And my just one last takeaway is if you are interested in getting involved, don't be afraid to use your voice. When you're at your favorite shows or you see some of your favorite bands doing good things, like tell them. And, when you see venues doing things that you wish were different, like tell them too. So thank you so much to everybody for coming on. We really, really appreciate it. And I will send us back to Amelia.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie and Dawn, and all of our panelists for that really amazing conversation. Now, everyone, we would like you to mark your calendars for our next webinar on September 24th, Policy Matters, Strengthening the Final UN Plastics Treaty. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our global coalition. It's currently free to join as an individual, business, or nonprofit organization. And this picture here is from Grace's tour, some of the art she was talking about. So there's a little example there as well. And then finally, you can connect with us on social media to learn more about our work. We will also be sending out a follow-up survey after the webinar and appreciate your feedback to help us improve our future events. We will also send out a recording of this webinar in the coming days so that you can share it with anyone who is unable to join us today. Thanks again to everyone for joining. Thanks also to our Plastic Pollution Coalition member groups and partners who shared this webinar with their communities and networks. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar on September 24th. See you soon. Thanks.